I want to welcome everyone to the New England Carnival Glass Association educational seminar that we put on every year. In talking about what we wanted to talk about this year, a bunch of us here in New England do collect Dugan Carnival glass, so we thought we'd just walk through a little information, a little history about Dugan Diamond, because when we say that we collect Dugan, we have to think about what we're actually collecting. So if we move to the first screen, this is a slide that has everything wrong with it. You would never present a slide like this. It's way too busy, so I'm going to walk you through it. But when we think about Dugan Diamond glass, we have to think about a couple things. And remember, we're collecting Carnival glass. So how does Carnival glass, Dugan Diamond come together? Well, you have to think that it's a plant. It's an actual factory, and it's located in Indiana, Pennsylvania. It opened in 1892, and in 1894 it closed down. It wasn't Dugan at this time, but in 1896 Northwood Glass Company was formed, and this is Harry Northwood. He started a glass company in this plant in Indiana, Pennsylvania in 1896. But Harry kind of turned his factory over to the National Glass Company in 1899. Harry left the National Glass Company in 1901, and in 1904 the National Glass Company was kind of falling apart, so Thomas Dugan purchases the plant with other individuals, and they renamed the company Dugan Glass Company in 1904. Now in 1913, Thomas Dugan leaves the Dugan Glass Company for reasons unknown. And in 1913, it's renamed the Diamond Glassware Company. And it remained the Diamond Glassware Company until 1931, when it burnt down. So that's the history of the physical plant in Indiana, Pennsylvania. So we also want to think about the Dugans, the name Dugan. And we're really talking about two Dugans, Thomas Dugan and Alfred Dugan. Now they're brothers, and they are the cousins of Harry Northwood. So I want to explain that to you. So Thomas and Alfred are brothers. Their father Samuel had a sister, Elizabeth Dugan. Elizabeth Dugan married John Northwood, and Elizabeth Dugan and John Northwood are the parents of Harry Northwood. So the Dugans arrive in the United States. They came over from England in 1881, essentially following Harry Northwood, who came over about the same time. They started working in the glass industry at the Hobbs Bruckner plant in Wheeling, West Virginia. But what they were really doing is following Harry Northwood around. So in 1887, they went to Martins Ferry, Ohio to work for the Northwood Glass Company. In 1892, they went to the Northwood Glass Company in Elwood, Pennsylvania. And in 1896, when Harry moves his glass company to Indiana, Pennsylvania, the Dugans come with him. They remained at the National Glass Company, and when Harry leaves the National Glass Company, Thomas and Alfred remain in Indiana, Pennsylvania at the National Glass Company. So Thomas Dugan and others purchased the plant and rename it the Dugan Glass Company. Now Thomas is not the president of the company, but his name is on the glass company. When these companies were formed, they often took, business people in the local town. People bought shares, and that's how they raised capital to start a company. Again, in 1913, Dugan leaves. He goes to Maryland, and Alfred also left at that same time. But Alfred did return to Indiana, Pennsylvania in 1915, and he remained at the Indiana, Pennsylvania until 1982. In the 1930s, Thomas retires from glass, and in 1944, Thomas passes away. So we have the plant, we have the people, and now we want to think about Carnival glass. So Carnival glass was really started in Indiana, Pennsylvania in 1909, and so we see that Thomas Dugan, who purchased the company in 1904 as part of others, was at the plant when Carnival production started in 1909. And I do have a single flower peach opal bowl that is inscribed 1909. So from 1909 to 1913, Carnival Glass is being produced in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Thomas Dugan and Alfred Dugan are there. So that's the highlighted yellow. So when we say we collect Dugan glass, we're really talking about 1909 to 1913, Indiana, Pennsylvania. 1913, the company becomes Diamond Glassware. And yes, a Dugan actually returns to the factory. Alfred returns, and he worked there from 1915 to 1928. But essentially 1913 to 1931, we're talking about the Diamond Glassware Company in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Okay. And you can kind of see this through some of the advertisements of the time. Here's an ad for Northwood Company in 1896, main offices and works, Indiana, Pennsylvania. Then in 1899, we see an announcement. The National Glass Company has assumed control of the following glass manufacturing plants. And here it says, Northwood Glass Company, Indiana, Pennsylvania. So you can kind of see through the ads the ownership of the Indiana plant. If we go ahead. Now this is actual letterhead from the office. And in 1904, we can see that it's become the Dugan Glass Company, successors to the National Glass Company, operating the Northwood Glass Works in Indiana, Pennsylvania. So it's funny that they kept on their letterhead that they were the Northwood plant, who became the National plant, who became the Dugan plant. They kind of wanted those Northwood tailcoats. But in 1914, we can see that the name of the company has changed. This is the company letterhead. It's now the Diamond Glass Company, successors to Dugan Glass Company. Okay. And just a shot of the actual plant that the glass all came from. Here it is, Dugan Glass Company, Indiana, Pennsylvania. Built on the railroad tracks. You can imagine the rail cars coming up the side of the plant, stopping, unloading all the supplies, and then refilling with barrels of glass. So all this glass that we see here in front of us at one point in time was at this factory. Probably in a barrel, being shipped to stores, being shipped to the Butler Brothers, but this is where it all came from. So now if we think about the glass that Dugan Diamond is making, we're fortunate enough to have the Butler Brothers catalogs that we can look at to go back and think about the different types of glass. Now, Dugan made a lot more than Carnival glass, so I want to start in 1906. Here's a Butler Brothers catalog, Opalescent Novelty Assortment. So in 1906, you can actually see some of the patterns that we collect in Carnival glass. Here is a Twigs vase. So this was made in opalescent glass, and here it is shaped differently. This is the Jack in the Pulpit crimped edge Dugan vase. Another item made very early is the Dugan Swan. So here's the Dugan Swan. This is actually peach opal. It's got a very light opal on the head of the swan, but it was made in opalescent glass, and here it is made in Carnival glass. Another item that we don't always see all the time, Stippled Estates. There it is right there. A small vase made in peach opal from 1906, but later made in Carnival glass. You don't find very many of these. And you can see they have other items up here. I believe that if you looked at that, you could probably assume that that is jeweled heart underneath. You can probably see it more in this one, that that's a jeweled heart pattern. Now in 1906, when in 1904, when Dugan bought the plant, they did take over all the molds that were owned by Northwood at the time. So any patterns made by Northwood up until that point became National Glass molds, became Dugan molds. Okay. Also, another ad from 1906, another line of glass that Dugan was making at the time in 1906, our Venetian vase assortment. And a lot of us see in Carnival glass circles Venetian glass. It's rolled in frit. It is iridized. It's got an iridescence to it. And I believe that this vase is the second one from the right. This is like a light amethyst color. But you can kind of see that they made these in various assorted sizes. And these also transformed into Carnival glass. This is called Hyacinth, made in peach opal. And it's reminiscent, somewhat similar to the second to the left vase there. And that's called Hyacinth. So then, 1906, we know that Carnival glass was really started in 1909, so we moved to a 1911 ad. And around this time, you can kind of tell that the production at the plant was really turning towards Carnival glass production. Came out with new molds, but you still see the jeweled heart reference in the smooth raised bowl. The exterior of the jeweled heart, smooth raise. Now, this is in peach opal, so you can tell, you know, Thomas Dugan was still at the plant in 1911. This ad is all of this, all the items here are found predominantly in peach opal, so, as well as other colors, but, so Thomas Dugan and peach opal, because of the time, the ads, Thomas Dugan and peach opal, I think, are synonymous. Now, Dugan was doing a couple different things than the other manufacturers, such as Fenton and Northwood. Although other manufacturers were enameling glass, a lot of them were enameling water sets and table sets, but Dugan enameled a lot of bowls. So here's a stippled flower in peach opal, this item right here, and you can see that the enameling, I would say that this is Lily of the Valley, that this Lily of the Valley is pictured right there. They had other types of flowering enameling that they did, but I think this is an absolute match in stippled flower. Another item that Dugan did differently is that they made handled baskets. Not a lot of companies made baskets with applied handles. Imperial has some baskets, but they're molded handles. But Dugan was manufacturing and selling baskets with an applied handle. This is single flower in peach opal. That's a ski star, and that's probably stippled petals. But they made the item, they formed it into a basket, and they applied a piece of glass to form a handle. I know that Fenton has one or two items, but those are considered rarities. I think Dugan, they were a production line item for them. Now, 1911. When we think about what glass was being made at the factory in 1911, one of the things, obviously, as Carnival collectors, we're always interested in colors. Now, Dugan didn't have a wide variety of colors. At this time, they were about 90% of their output was peach opal, white. So we have a lot of peach opal. Obviously, the ski star. Peach is crystal glass with an opal edge and a marigold overlay. So you have the peach. They were making white. So here's I think it's garden path plate with the pool of pearls exterior. They were making amethyst, and I think we all love our Dugan purple. Here's a 4 flowers ruffled bowl in a deep amethyst color. Another color they were making is oxblood. Now I find it hard to find oxblood, true oxblood. If you were to hold this up to a light and compare it to another item, this is simply so much deeper purple. And maybe you can't see through it, maybe you can, but I think this is the closest thing I have to oxblood. Now one color you don't see a lot of, but they did make some, is marigold. Do I have any? Here's a vineyard tumbler in marigold. It was one of their colors, but you don't actually find marigold Dugan glass all that often. So those 5 colors were the vast majority of glass produced by Dugan. They did produce some other colors, but to find them is quite rare. So if you do come across a piece of Dugan green, buy it by all means. This is the target vase in green. So this is very rare. And the color blue, you don't find a lot of Dugan blue. This is a lattice and points vase in blue. So if you find a blue Dugan or a green Dugan, you've really found a rarer piece. Okay. Now 1912, these are some of the other items that they're making. They're making vases like we saw, the target vase, the wide rib vase in peach opal, and I packed 2 targets and I didn't pack a pulled loop. So. But they're also making other items. They're making a lot of tableware. They're making water sets. Here we have a wreath cherry water set and a maple leaf water set. The maple leaf water pitcher in amethyst. Okay. What's the next screen? Okay, go back one. Sorry. So here it is, 1912. Dugan Glass Company is making a lot of glass, and on February 5th, there's a fire. So I'll just read this out of the book. Almost completely destroyed the machine shop where molds were both created and stored. So, although it was a small fire confined to the machine shop, there were molds being stored in the machine shop. Now, fortunately, a lot of the molds are out on the factory floor where the glass is being made, but certain molds were destroyed, although you can't really tell which molds. But in looking at the Butler Brothers catalogs, certain patterns seem to disappear after 1912. They include the ski star, they include wishbones and spades, here in a chop plate. Pedal and fan in peach opal, and stippled petals, which I think is way down there. But so certain patterns did disappear after 1912, and you would have to think that why would they stop making wishbone and spades? Why would they stop advertising it? And so you might conclude that those molds were destroyed in the 1912 fire. Okay. So then we move into 1915. So now we know that Thomas Dugan left in early 1914 or 13. So by this time it is now the Diamond Glass Company. Even looking at this 1915 ad, you can kind of tell that some of the patterns are declining in intricacy, and they're becoming a little bit more simple. You have a leaf ray pattern in amethyst here, which is this bowl up here. But they continue to make some patterns that even Dugan made. Here's the lattice and points in blue, right there. So when the Diamond Company takes over the Dugan Glass Company, they obviously retained all the existing molds, continued to make glass out of the molds, but they did start introducing some of their own patterns. And if you do come up here, there are certain patterns with a diamond next to the name. If you take a look at them, those are patterns that were developed during the time of the Diamond Glass Company. Okay. Let's go back to that one slide. 1915. So Diamond also makes colors, and they continue to make the colors that Dugan made. They're making amethyst, peach opal, white, marigold, and blue. But as time goes on, they also start to experiment in a couple different colors. They're introducing ice green. Here's a windflower nappy in ice green. They're making Celeste blue. Here's a double stem rose in Celeste blue. Now some of these colors are coming out because they're expanding their line into like stretch glass, and these are somewhat associated with stretch glass colors, but they are making them in carnival patterns. And they also make a couple other colors. So if you come across, say, an aqua, so this is a very light blue. I did purchase it as aqua Spiralex vase. They're making some lavender, apple twigs, apple blossom twigs. I did confirm that this morning, that we would call this lavender because of the iridescence and the color, the light amethyst color with a lavender iridescence on it. They are making blue. You'll see these ads for the Cosmos Bowl continue right up through the end, and this is made in blue. But they are sticking with the predominant colors of amethyst, peach. They do make some, continue to make some marigold, but you kind of get a feel for the volume of color that they make just by looking at the glass here on the table. Okay. So in 1922, a lot of people think that carnival glass is the 1910s, but you have to know that it did continue into the 1920s. Here's 1922 Butler's catalog. Pause.
Answer, it might be the phone.
So here we have an ad from 1922. They're still making carnival glass in 1922. The double stem rose bowl, paneled cherries, and the Cosmos bowl. Okay. In 1924, we see another line that Dugan is entering. This is really what we would call stretch. This is so here you have the Diamond Glassware Company of Indiana, Pennsylvania, one of our many attractive console sets. They did spell the word attractive wrong, but that's okay. So this pattern is the Mae West pattern, and the Mae West pattern we think of as really the candlesticks. I don't know that the bowl has a name, but here's a Mae West candlestick in amethyst. These come in Celeste blue. They also come in a red, a ruby red. And here's a bowl. Doesn't match the bowl in the picture, but I think this bowl could have come out of a mold and been shaped in many different ways. And it says, one of our many attractive console sets. And this thing is freaking heavy. So, I don't know that we have names for the bowls. I think the name really refers to the candlestick. Do we know why it's called the Mae West? It's shapely. So they were making stretch. You know, they made some candlesticks that we might consider stretch. This is the Dugan spindle in ice green. They made a couple other candlestick sets. Okay. And even up to 1929, we're still seeing ads for carnival glass. So carnival glass continued to be produced in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Now, by this time, the patterns coming out of the factory are quite simple. You don't have the maple leaf water sets. You don't have the Christmas compotes. You don't have the many fruits punch sets. You're coming down to a simple pattern. Here's golden grape. Here's apple blossoms, which you can see right here. The twigs tall vase, coin spot, the leaf raised nappy. But they seem to have transformed themselves from a lot of the purples and the peaches to, and that was the door, people. Good thing. But here we have an apple blossoms in a marigold, somewhat of a simpler pattern, but I think that reflects the time of 1929. Okay? And then it all comes to an end. Here we are in 1931. Here's a photo that appeared on the front page of the Indiana Evening Gazette on Monday, June 29, 1931. You can see the main stack of the plant, and it actually is in the distance. So when the fire happened, the main factory floor survived. But the office area, stock rooms, decorating rooms, packing areas were all destroyed. So when we think about what was destroyed, the office, all the records, the stock rooms, decorating rooms, and packing areas, that's where they stored all the product to make the glass. That's where they stored all the finished product that was being shipped. They lost all their inventory. So initially they thought that they would rebuild, but essentially they didn't. Fenton and L.G. Wright purchased many of the surviving molds because any molds that would have been on the factory floor survived, thus allowing pieces to be reproduced in the 70s and 80s. So a lot of the molds were purchased by either Fenton or L.G. Wright. You'll see items like the maple leaf, the dahlia water set, reproduced in the 70s and 80s. And these reproductions are very difficult to determine whether they're reproductions or originals from the 1910-20s, simply because they're using the same molds. The best way to tell is through color and weight. So here we are in 1931. The factory's destroyed, the molds have been sold, and the Dugan Diamond Glass Company in Indiana, Pennsylvania no longer exists. And it essentially dropped off the face of the earth. When we think about what happens after the 1930s, the Depression hits, World War II, glass, people don't really collect it yet. Come the 1950s and 60s, when people start collecting glass again, Dugan wasn't even mentioned. Joanne and Clint brought the Hartung books, the Presnick books. In all those books, there's no mention of the Dugan Glass Company. They mention the other four, Millersburg, Fenton, Imperial, and Northwood, but they don't mention Dugan. So what's the next slide? So here's actually some excerpts out of the books, the Hartung books and the Presnick's books. And so I just copied some pages. Here we have Northwood's Amaryllis. This is the Amaryllis pattern in a small compote, almost flattened to a plate. But it's attributed to Northwood initially. So we're talking the 1960s. Beaded panels, peach opalescent, but attributed to Fenton. The bottom right, we have the Many Fruits Punch Bowl here, also attributed to Northwood. So how many people have a Millersburg Heavy Grape? Kathy and Galen have one. But I kind of asked around for a Dugan Heavy Grape pattern, and we were unsuccessful in acquiring one for this talk. So if anybody sees a Dugan Heavy Grape, bring it to New England. And that was attributed to Millersburg, probably because of the compass exterior. And Millersburg also had some geometric exteriors, so it was attributed to Millersburg. So people went along in the 1960s and 70s collecting their glass, thinking that such items as the Christmas compote was a Northwood piece. And you'd be proud to own, if you were a Northwood collector, you would want to own the Christmas Compote because it was a premier piece from the Northwood Company. But then in 1981, there was an article published in the Antique Trader magazine that basically some individuals went to Indiana, Pennsylvania, because there was a construction project going on, and they were digging up something for a university, and they were digging up these dump sites filled with glass shards, and they were collecting these shards of glass, and they were looking at them and saying, well, we know what that shard is. It's a piece of carnival glass, and it's the pattern of such and such a pattern. Well, how can that be if Millersburg, it's not Millersburg, Ohio, it's not the Fenton plant in Wheeling, West Virginia, it's not the Northwood plant, it's Indiana, Pennsylvania. So, with the help of such people as Charlotte Williams, Jack and Mary Anderson, Charlotte and Rose Needley, and Tom Burns. Tom, you mentioned here.
Whoa.
So, did you have anything?
I'm just thinking about all these days when you were talking about it, how we came across to realizing the Dugan Northwood thing. I was just thinking about that. It
So,
was Rose and Carl Slady.
Slady.
Yeah, they had, that's a big stretch auction at CCN here.
So this article comes out in 1981, informs everyone that the items that they own and have collected as Northwood, Millersburg, and Fenton are not what they think they are, that they are in fact Dugan diamond glass from Indiana, Pennsylvania. How did that go over, Tom?
Okay, people that were true Northwood collectors couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
The rest of us were good with it, because the shards, what they did, the Indiana University of Pennsylvania there in Indiana was putting in a new football stadium. And during the construction and afterwards, little shards of glass worked from the dump site, worked its way up, and football players were getting cut by glass on the ground. So they had to redig the thing or something like that, and they came across all these glass shards, which is from the dump site. And that's where they found all the exterior pattern. You know, it just blew from there. Because back then you had Bill Heacock in the 80s, and his true job was being a researcher. He dove right into it. Like Charlotte Williams, you mentioned, she had one of the biggest collections in California, and they were some of the big shots back in them days. Carl Slady was the president of the England Carnival Glass Association, and I was 21 years. I think I was 21 years old, and just got off the board of directors or something for that. That was crazy. That was fun. But yeah, it just sort of.
So if you were a purist Northwood collector and you were told that one of your pieces wasn't a Northwood piece, you weren't happy. But you have to think that once Dugan became known, Dugan is now highly collectible,
That's right.
simply for it being Dugan. So from 1931, the date of the fire, to 1981, those 50 years, really Dugan glass wasn't really even thought of or known.
And another thing was that Thomas Dugan and Harry Northwood were related.
Yep.
Say that's what sort of calmed the nerve of the Northwood people, is that they still had an
They had-
influence with the Dugan plant.
So-
That's sort of interesting. Because that plant was owned by Northwood in the early times.
Yes.
And they just figured everything that was made there after we found it out was Northwood. You know.
It was
Do you
Dugan.
think that Northwood was giving glass to Dugan to make for them
No,
at one time?
No.
Well, did they think that? I read that.
no, because of pieces that are signed Northwood.
Right.
But they were custard glass. Custard glass was
But
made
the
in the late.
Nautilus shelf.
Custard glass, like the Argonaut shell and all that, were made right in the early 1900s. Then Harry sold the plant to Thomas, and Thomas used the molds. And Harry said, "Hey, you still got my name on that piece." That's why
Is this the last slide?
he took it off the Nautilus and you know, the purple ones. You don't see that much signed Northwood script because Harry said, "No." So go ahead. I'll behave myself.
You're fine.
I've been pretty good, but I'm.
So then, in the 1990s, we were fortunate to have individuals writing, doing some research, and you mentioned William Heacock. They put out research books, Dugan Diamond, The Story of Indiana, Pennsylvania Glass. And Carl Burns put out Dugan and Diamond Carnival Glass. Now this book is really a pattern identification book, It simply goes through patterns and talks about each one. I've read this book 20 times. Like you say, Heacock was a researcher, so what you find in this book is a lot of narratives, a lot of research. He went to the Indiana, Pennsylvania library, got newspapers, he went to the town hall and got minutes of the Dugan Glass Company Board of Directors meetings. Really got a lot of old advertisements. While Carl Burns' book is really focused on Carnival Glass, this is the entire Dugan Company. It goes into many of the other types of glass that the Dugan Diamond Glass Company made. So if you're interested in Dugan as a whole, this is an excellent book. It just talks about all the different types of glass that they made. They made, lemonade sets in crystal and decorated ware. So these are both very interesting and very informative. And these really are from the 1990s. So we went from 1931, the company's gone, to nobody remembered it, to 1981, where the article came out. And then in the 1990s, a lot of research was done about the company and published, when we were very fortunate that they did publish books so that they captured the information. So it's available to us today. And so that is a short history of the Carnival glass made in Dugan Diamond. Thank you.